Recording.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Today it's a meeting format, so I'm gonna keep an eye and make sure that I'm admitting people as they come in. Happy Tuesday. My name is Jorge Acosta Palmera, and I'm the director of the statewide training initiative. Thank you for joining us here today for bringing a coaching mindset to supervision. Before I introduce our speaker, I do want to go through some quick housekeeping announcements. This training is being recorded. You will receive a copy of the recording in an email. In this case, since it's a meeting, it will come from me. I will send it within 24 hours. If for whatever reason you don't see that email, let me know. You can shoot me an email, I'll drop it in the chat, and I'll make sure you get a link to the recording. This will also be posted on YouTube, so you should be able to find it afterwards. So this training is approved by the Florida Bar for 1.5 general and 1.5 professionalism credits. I will announce the CLE code towards the end. I will also drop it in the chat. And the CLE code, I will also include it in that automatic email that will go out. I will also make sure to include it in the YouTube description as well. Closed captions are enabled for anybody who needs them. If you're having any issues with accessibility, just reach out to me via chat or send me an email, and I will get to you. This training is being co-hosted by the Public Interest Law section, or PILS. If you're not familiar with PILS, I'll drop a link here in the chat. They have a lot of working groups and operating committees. There's a lot of great attorneys that are part of PILS. It's a great opportunity to network and have access to some of the best minds that we have here in Florida. So final piece of housekeeping announcements. Typically, I will say Q&A towards the end, but in this format, if you have, since this is a meeting format, if you do have a question or a comment, feel free to raise your hand or drop your question in the chat. If you want to kind of keep it anonymous, you can message us privately and we'll just try to bring up the question. At some point, we will have breakout rooms, so be on the lookout for that. And, I think that's the last item of housekeeping items. So right now, it's welcome back, Julia. It is my pleasure to introduce you again after our previous webinar 2 weeks ago. Julia Wilson is a leadership coach and consultant specializing in nonprofit management and board governance, focusing on nonprofits and civil legal aid services, civil rights, and advocacy. With over 20 years of leadership experience, she has served as executive director of the John Paul Stevens Foundation, One Justice, and the Legal Aid Association of California. Julia holds multiple coaching certifications and a certificate in nonprofit board governance consulting through BoardSource. Her board work draws on frameworks like governance as leadership and BoardSource's purpose-driven board leadership, as well as the ABA standards for the provision of civil legal aid and the Legal Services Corporation performance criteria. She integrates expertise in nonprofit funding, governance, and mindfulness with a commitment to equity, inclusion, and racial justice. Julia has served as both CEO and a board member of national nonprofits and is the immediate past chair of the BoardSource Board of Directors. So without further ado, I'm pleased to pass it over to Julia. Julia, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jorge, for all of this collaboration. I'm so grateful to you and appreciative for all the work that goes into this initiative and for the opportunity to be here again today. So just huge thanks to you. And before I get into the content for today, I just want to pause as someone who has just dear loved ones in North Carolina to express just my heart and concern and care for everyone who is dealing with the impact of the hurricane and all of the aftermath. So just sending real thoughts and energy in your region of the country. Okay, so for today, bringing a coaching mindset to supervision, a couple of learning goals for today. Let me get there we go. What's a coaching mindset? Like, what do we mean by that in the coaching world? What are the benefits of a coaching mindset? Just a short plug for like why to even think about bringing this as one of your tools in your overall supervision toolkit. We will actually learn 3 practical coaching skills that you can start applying right away. And, full warning, heads up, there are some breakout room interactions today so that you can just in a very light way, just a couple of minutes, start trying out these skills. because particularly for folks like me in this meeting who were trained as lawyers, some of them run counter to some of the training that we receive as lawyers. And then we'll close out with some reflection around action items and what part of this you might want to take forward into your own supervision or work. The flow for today in order to achieve those goals is basically just this: goals and flow, coaching mindset benefits, getting into the skills, 2 practice sessions in groups of 3, and then close out. So that's the roadmap. And as Jorge said, please feel free to put questions in the chat. He and I will both be monitoring the chat. You can also raise your hand. If you want your question to be more anonymous, feel free to send it to me or Jorge directly. So what do we mean by a coaching mindset? Because I want to be really clear, what we're not talking about today is becoming a coach. I mean, all of these things derive from coaching modalities, but I'm talking more about adding or a layer of a coaching mindset to other existing supervision skills. So the formal definition of coaching from the International Coaching Federation, which is like the global bar association for accredited coaches, is this, and I'll just highlight the pieces that I think are most relevant here. That coaching is a partnership, meaning it is a relationship, so it can fit within the container of a supervision relationship. And it's a process. It's not a one-time thing. It's an ongoing way of interacting in that relationship. And the goal of it, the thing that these skills are aimed at, is helping someone else really realize their full professional potential, their strengths, assets, their ability to problem solve, right? So it's a process in a relationship aimed at supporting the other person in doing their best thinking and work. So if you think about supervision as a relationship channel, almost like a tunnel that extends between the person who's doing the supervision and the person being supervised, the direct report. So think about this relationship space as a place where people are on either side and all kinds of stuff goes on in that channel, right? There's all kinds of content and words and communication that happens. There are all kinds of feelings that happen just in work relationships as in any other relationship. And there are thoughts and stories and beliefs and difference that happens in there. And so, of course, there's also scratchy places, disagreement, misalignment, right? So everything's taking place in this tunnel. So if you're using this tunnel metaphor, how do you think about adding a coaching mindset to supervision? So I often think about how much space in that tunnel or that channel is the supervisor taking up? So if either person can step into that relationship channel and sort of take up more space, how much is the supervisor taking up space in that channel? So I would say that in delegation, the supervisor is taking up almost all of the space, right? There are goals, objectives, outcomes that need to happen, work product, expectations. And so the supervisor is stepping all the way into that channel in order to have clear and transparent expectations in delegation. In supervision, ongoing supervision, the supervisor is still taking up probably at least half or more of the space in the channel, but there is more back and forth, right? You want the direct report to be checking for clarification. It could be more of a conversation. In mentorship, often the supervisor is taking up less of the space, right? You might share a story or an experience or something from your own professional journey, but you're doing it not to take up all the space. You're doing it to draw out the other person, right? So here's something that happened to me when I encountered something similar, and here's how I thought about it. What does that bring up for the other person? How does that support them in their journey? You offer the content to support their reflection and application in their own experience. Coaching is where the supervisor takes up almost no space in the relationship channel. You might enter just a little bit in to share some factual observations about something, but what you're really focused on is drawing the other person in, they take up more space in that relationship channel. They're doing more of the talking. They're doing more of the thinking. They're doing their problem solving out loud. And so it's not that coaching is going to take over all of these other things. It's like, what are you, for different purposes in supervision, which of these modalities or frameworks or approaches matches the thing that you're trying to do in partnership with this other person? That's why coaching can sometimes feel awkward for folks, because you're like, I'm not doing very much, right? If you feel like you're not doing very much and the other person's doing more, then that's coaching. Okay, so there are 4 competencies or components to a coaching mindset. So I'm going to go through each of these in turn. The first and most important, and if you only take one thing away from today, this is the thing to take away, is the importance of bringing curiosity to your supervision when you're deploying a coaching mindset. And this means curiosity, first of all, about the other person's experience, their thoughts, their solutions, what's happening for them, their experience, how they're making sense, their reflections, right? You're super curious, but you're also monitoring with some curiosity, like, what role am I playing here, right? There's some self-awareness in the coaching mindset. So a little, like, a little dose of curiosity in your own direction. Most of your curiosity is focused on the other person. The second competency is a belief in the other person. And right away, when I say this, folks start saying, well, what about constructive feedback conversations? Like, can you still hold a belief in the other person? So let me say this. The first thing is, this belief in the other person does not mean believing that they are necessarily capable of doing the job that they're in right now, right? You can kind of take that component, that assessment that all supervisors make, and set it to the side. What you're doing in coaching is you believe that they have information that will help them in their own problem solving. So you believe that they're capable of problem solving, they're capable of reflecting on their experience, they're capable of learning and growing, and they're capable of exploring this on their own with some support. That all applies in constructive conversations as well. And I'll go a little bit more into detail that at the end. Lack of attachment. This means that you might have ideas about how a problem or a situation or an error or something should be resolved. But for the moment, when you're deploying a coaching mindset, you kind of set your own assessments aside, and you don't need to worry about being right or wrong. You're helping the other person do their own thinking, right? Their own reflection. And for the moment, you're not assessing whether you feel like it's, good or bad, or smart or not, or, the right solution. You're just setting that aside for a moment. The purpose is exploration. And the last thing is that this requires being fully present to the other person, which means like minimizing distractions, not having other work going, making sure for the moment that you can really focus on the supervision conversation, and trying to set other pressures and time demands aside, even if it's a quick conversation. Okay, so from this, a little bit about why do those competencies in this mindset matter? Like, why would we even try to do these things in a supervision setting? So I'm going to do just a little tiny bit of the neuroscience of coaching, just for the folks like who like to geek out a little bit on the science behind this. The first thing is that what you're doing is you're creating at its core a thinking partnership. 2 people operating in partnership to think about something, as colleagues, as partners. And what you're doing when you support someone in operating that way is you're tapping this thing that humans can do, which is pretty remarkable, called metacognition, which just means that we're capable of thinking about how we think. And other mammals don't do that. My dog doesn't think about the fact that he's thinking about being hungry, right? He just does the thinking. But humans, we can take a step back and say, how are we thinking about this thing? And that's really the core of problem solving, right? Is to be able to think, assess how we're thinking about something. So that's the core of coaching. A couple other aspects of the neuroscience of coaching is that when you ask folks questions that get them to reflect on their vision for something, their sense of purpose and connection to the work, their sense of what's possible, like forward-looking pieces, research shows that this engages something in the brain called the positive emotional attractor state. And that's just it's exactly what it sounds like. It attracts the brain in the moment to positive, meaning pleasant emotions, right? Our brains like to do this thing about looking towards the future with some sense of vision and purpose and connection, right? What's possible. And so when you intentionally put the brain in that state, as opposed to its counterpart, which is the negative emotional attractor state, right? If you help people get their brains into this positive emotion, it's attracting positive, pleasant emotions. What happens is it regulates the autonomic or the automatic nervous system. It puts the nervous system into the side of rest and digest. So it down regulates people's nervous systems. It's the opposite of the stress response. So when you get people into that state, they're more creative, they can see solutions more easily, right? And so it takes a fair amount of trust in that relationship channel to do this, but that's one of the things that you're working to build through coaching. The other thing that you're doing is you're helping folks engage this part of the brain behind the forehead, which is called the prefrontal cortex. And this is the part of the brain that's responsible for what folks call executive function. And it's really sort of like high level, high cognitive thinking. It's problem solving, decision making, analyzing complex situations. It's also complex language, it's emotional regulation, right? And so it's a super important part of the brain for all of the work that we do in the legal services sector. And so in coaching, what you're trying to do is sort of slow down the brain's processes enough to allow folks to fully engage this part of the brain to maximum potential. The last thing that you're doing in this coaching mindset is you're helping folks shift their brains in the default mode network. So there are two networks in the brain. One is about tasks, like when you are doing something, writing something, producing something, thinking about one thing, your brain's over in the active task network. It's like a focus, focus, focus in. Sometimes though, when you're thinking about what went wrong with something or planning something or solving a problem, you want to put the brain over in the non-active task side, which is called default mode, which is where the brain gets to daydream a little bit. It's more expansive thinking, it's more creative. Like it's the part of the brain that when you're out walking your dog or taking a shower, suddenly goes, oh my God, that thing I've been worrying about, I see the solution. That's the default mode network at work. It kind of takes things and it's constantly sort of processing them in the very, very back in the non-conscious part of the brain, and it will deliver you these creative insights. So in a coaching mindset, you're trying to support someone's brain being in that more expansive, creative space so that they can see more solutions. So they're not seeing things quite so binarily, but more expansively. So a little bit about the science behind the why of bringing coaching to supervision. So let me just pause and see if oh, great. Yep. Lack of attachment. There's a question about what's meant by lack of attachment. So, and this actually relates a little bit to the neuroscience. We sense from each other when folks are coming in with a position, right? We can just sort of sense like, oh, they've got a particular point of view on something, or they've got an answer. And sometimes in supervision, in delegation, or when you're really trying to aim someone towards an outcome, you are telling them, this is the thing that I expect and need, or that the team needs, or that the organization needs, or that the program needs, and you need to deliver that. That's delegation, that's supervision, that's expectation management. In coaching, you are relaxing that part of yourself for the moment, and you are not attached to yourself, to your own point of view, and you are not judging what the other person says in that moment. Because what you're doing them is helping them hear themselves talk out loud, which is how people come to their own solution. So you're trying to relax the part of the brain that's judging, categorizing, cataloging, doing all that assessment that our brain does so well. And you're just trying to help the other person hear their own thinking. And so particularly as lawyers, because so much of our work is that categorizing, assessing, how am I going to respond? How am I going to reply? How do I understand this? How am I making judgments in the moment? You're trying to set that part of yourself aside because you're focused on the other person's brain doing that work in the moment. So you try to just not be like, nope, that's wrong. When someone comes up with something, because you want to say, oh, That's interesting. I'm not sure I totally agree with that, but let's follow it. Let's keep going. So that would be a concrete way of playing around with that difference. Okay, so some of the benefits, my little PowerPoint, there we go. This is maybe my sales pitch on why I think folks in legal services should bring coaching to supervision. One is that it empowers your direct reports. And, I coach supervisors all the time, and I have supervised many, many people. And so maybe I'll just speak for myself and say that moment when you feel like a direct report is relying on you to do the problem solving for their own role, and it can be such a thorny place because in the interest of speed and time, because time is such a scarce resource, you just keep giving them solutions, but you wish they would stop coming to you for solutions. So coaching is one way to empower and have some accountability for direct reports to say, actually, we're going to pause for a moment and help you work on solving this problem yourself, so they grow that muscle over time. It supports folks in their professional development. So it's a beautiful way to engage with someone who's really excelling, where you say, hey, you know what? I bet you've got an answer for this. Let's have a conversation that helps you explore your thinking instead of you hear what my thinking is. And so in that way, it encourages professional growth. If you're giving folks stretch assignments where you are trying to stretch their capacity, coaching is a beautiful complement to them because it helps them see their own growth and learning in real time as they stretch. And then it strengthens their problem solving skills, and which we all want, right? And this is necessary. If you're going to advance in any role in any organization, you need to start being able to do your problem solving as an independent exercise. So it teaches people that skill. Other benefits that show up when multiple folks are showing up in a coaching mindset, because you've got this curiosity, you're not attached to being right? You're able to sort of engage other folks in hearing their own problem solving, you're present to the conversations. It helps teams communicate more and hold each other both personally accountable. Like I feel responsible for my own problem solving, but I'm also able to hold some peer accountability. With clients, when you're able to bring this coaching mindset with clients, you're really seeing them truly as the agents of their own journey, and empowers more conversation about decision making and how are they thinking about addressing the life problem that brought them in for legal help. And then within coalitions or cross organizational partnerships, or these sort of collaboratives that we often work in, it helps problem solving because everyone's engaged in being able to do this problem solving together. And it helps folks hold disagreement differently because you're not attached to being right and wrong, and you're really curious about the other people's perspective, even when there's disagreement, understanding that diversity of thinking is what generates more information that leads to better decisions and results. So that's my short plug on like why even think about bringing this to supervision. Okay, so let me check if there are any, let me just actually pause here for a moment and check the chat, or if there are anyone with raised hands to see if there's any questions about any of those pieces. No, great. And of course you can send those in. We're going to move now into the more tactical part of this training today around 3 coaching skills and some time to practice those in small breakout rooms. And let me just say here that I am a person who doesn't love small group work activity, and all of the science shows how important it is for adult learners. So for everyone who's rolling their eyes right now about the fact that there's breakout room work, I totally get you. And I'm going to be intentional about giving us that space, even though it's not the preferred learning style for everybody. Okay, turning to our first skill, listening. Before I get into the details of this, let me just say, I was just over the conversation at a national summit on mindful leadership, and we were talking about, how active listening has become sort of a trope in many ways. Like people like, oh, she's active listening right now because she's going, right? And so let me just say there is a critique of performative active listening that can live right in this space, in this conversation. So I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about when people are over signaling how hard they are listening to you in a way that feels unauthentic. Like that's not what I'm talking about. But of course that lives in some of this space. So listening is the core and foundational skill in coaching and bringing a coaching mindset to anything. And we know that the entire human body, like our entire nervous system, is designed as like a big radar dish to read others. We are social creatures. And so for evolutionary purposes, we are designed to take in and absorb and really read other people. And this happens at a bunch of different levels. It happens at the cognition level when we're hearing words or other language and making sense of the content. And it also happens at the emotional level, right? That's why we can do sarcasm and subtext, because we're listening to each other, like what's the emotion underneath the words. And our nervous systems are also reading each other all day long. Our nervous systems are designed to co-regulate so that we are able to sense how nervous or relaxed someone else is without even realizing that we're doing it. So we're communicating with each other all the time in all of these different channels. Now, sometimes attorneys and advocates are trained to really focus in on that thinking level, right? What are the words that I'm hearing? What do they mean? How am I absorbing the facts, the tactical facts of the situation? And sometimes you have to do that in supervision too. You are very focused on what needs to get done, clear delegation, making sure the communication is heard and received. In coaching, you're trying to do more of this multi-channel communication and pay attention to it as it's going on. So in coaching, there are 3 levels of listening. And as I describe these, you might think about, like, all of us tend to have a default, like which one is most comfortable or familiar for us. And then we have ones that are not as comfortable. So you just might be thinking for yourself, as you move through your workday, which of these levels are you most likely in? So level 1 is internal, right? It is listening to ourselves. It's awareness of ourselves. And so this is often, the thing that you have to do in court or a legislative hearing, or sometimes when you're presenting in an outreach or know your rights situation, you are listening to the other person in order to reply, right? So as they're speaking, your brain is doing this predictive rehearsal thing about, okay, what's going to come out of my mouth next, right? So that's, or when you're listening to your own internal monologue, the commentary that runs in the mind all day long about what's going on in our lives, sometimes positive, often, self-critique. And so that's internal self-focused. So we're going to set that aside for today. We're going to try and not do as much of that, even though lawyers have to spend a lot of time learning how to do that really well and really quickly. Level 2 listening is focused listening on the other person. And we often say that if level 1 listening to someone else is listening to reply, level 2 is listening to understand. The whole purpose of our listening is to understand very fully the other person. And so we're taking the focus off of ourselves and putting it onto them. Sometimes I say it's like if you can take your listening and have it be a flashlight. Self-reflective listening, we're absorbed in our own, the flashlight's squarely on us and our experience. In level 2 listening, you take the flashlight and you train it on the other person. If your attention and awareness is a flashlight, you're training it on them. And listening like this is like the gift of your attention. And I'll tell you, if you do this with your loved ones, like if you settle into this level 2 listening on purpose with friends and family, it is a beautiful relationship gift. Like it's a different way of relating. And then level 3 is like a radar dish. It's more global listening, like taking in the whole environment. And this is what performers often do, like actors when they're really trying to take in and communicate to the whole audience, or jazz musicians, particularly when they're in that that place of improvisation, they are listening to each other with this sort of global listening. And sometimes it's good for teams to be able to do that, like what's going on in this group of humans right now. But for coaching, we're really talking about level 2. So as I said, it's listening to understand, not advise or fix or solve, right? You're taking all of that stuff away. And this is where curiosity really comes into play. And so you're really curious about the other person and realizing that you don't actually know what they're going to say next. So you're really listening to the words but also their voice, the tone. You're trying to figure out what's happening on in the emotional channel, like what's their emotional state right now. And you're trying to bring online the fact that your nervous system is reading their nervous system. Like, what's going on as they talk about this? It's a very different tone if they're frustrated about something than if they are also feeling curious or reflective about something. And let me just say here that the quality of your flashlight, right? If you're training your flashlight on them, it's not like in an interrogation. This is not like a harsh spotlight on them, because people can feel that. It's like a gentle, warm, glowing flashlight. Like, it's a warm, supportive thing, particularly in supervision, because if you're starting to train your attention on someone who's like, whoa, this has not been part of our relationship, why do I feel on the spot right now? So it's a warm and gentle tone on your side. Okay, let me pause here and see if there are any questions about this, because you're all now going to practice this level 2 listening. So let me see. I don't see any questions coming in or hands raised. Okay. So here's how I'm going to ask you to practice this level 2 listening. We're going to put you in groups of 3. That should work. 6. Yeah, there might be a group of 4. No, that should work. And so you're going to have about a minute just to go around and do introductions, and to spare you the awkward Zoom moment where everyone just stares at each other and wonders who's willing to talk first. I'm just going to ask you to go from shortest hair to longest hair. So you can just decide who fits in that order and go in that order. Do introductions first. You'll have about a minute for that. And then the first person who has the shortest hair, just share about something in your life that brings you energy or that you enjoy. And you can share at whatever level feels comfortable to you, right? Like, you get to choose where on the depth of sharing you go. And you're just going to do that for about a minute. And I would ask folks here to self-time, right? So keep an eye on the clock on your device, or set a timer on your phone, whatever supports you. But we want to make sure that there's some equity to the airtime in this. So something that brings you energy or that you enjoy for about a minute. That's actually the easiest part here. The 2 other folks in the group are just practicing listening at this level 2. And I would invite you to actually still your body, because sometimes when we do this, we start doing this. We're like, oh, yep, I hear you, I hear you, I hear you, which is just a reaction to the fact that, like, oh, I'm not going to say anything in this moment. I'm just going to look at this other person while they're talking. So try to still your body so that you're not over-indexing like nonverbal communication. And just focus on being super curious. You don't know what they're going to say next. Not being attached, like just letting what they're saying wash over you. Don't let the mind judge or assess it or catalog it in the moment. Be really present. There's so much that you can communicate just through your eyes, and just like, here I am. I'm really listening to you. And just explore what it's like to take your attention on purpose and gently focus it on this other person. Oh, thank you, Jorge, for putting those in. And then here's the thing. Watch in yourself any reaction after the person has shared for a minute, where you want to jump in and say, oh, that's awesome. That makes me think of when I do this, or, oh, there might be something that you'd enjoy. I'm thinking you could connect to this person, and just still that part of yourself that wants to connect through verbal stuff, and just say, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Also, because for the person who just shared, there can be some vulnerability as we're trying this out, right? There are ways that we signal like, I'm with you. And we're trying to turn the volume down on those parts of ourselves. So just say, thank you for sharing. And then switch to the next person who will do the same thing, share for a moment, the other 2 people, level 2 listening, and then you'll shift again. So we're gonna give you about 5 minutes for this, a minute for introductions, 3 or more minutes to share and switch. And then you'll have a minute in case anybody goes over a little bit, but do try for some self-timing. Let me just see if there's any questions before we put you into breakouts. And while you're thinking about what questions might be out there, I'm going to set up the breakout rooms. Let's see. Okay. And you should be assigned automatically. Let me make sure you're in for 5 minutes and you'll have a countdown timer for 15 minutes. Okay, so before we go, last chance to oops, I lost the breakout rooms. Hold on one second. That's so weird. There we go. Last chance for any questions? All right. Have fun practicing. And if you need help, it should whisk you away to a breakout room. If you need help moving to a room, let us know. Suzanne or Hillary, are you able to move into the breakout room? Ah, there we go. Hillary, how's it going on your side? Any tech problems?
May have been when I admitted Hillary, it took a minute, so I'm not sure. Maybe Hillary had some issues with logging in.
With tech. Let's see. Let's see. So she would be in room 10, it looks like.
I believe she joined room 1 now.
Oh, great. Oh, so they both moved to room 1. Okay, that's fine. So we've got everybody in a room though.
Sorry, I think I came back too soon. I don't know what happened. I was listening. Is that okay?
You're totally great. Everyone's coming back. So even if even if the Zoom swooped you out, that's the next thing now anyways.
Okay, thank you.
Great, welcome back. I think, let me check. I think everyone's back or just about back. Yeah, there we go. Welcome back. So a couple of debrief questions. And so actually, let me just first say thank you all for doing that. Just a couple debrief questions to land some of the learning or self-reflection. What was it like to be listened to that way? And I'm not looking here for pleasant, right? Unpleasant, pleasant, neutral, whatever your experience was, like authentically, what was it like to be listened to that way? And what was it like to listen to someone else that way? Like what felt comfortable, what maybe felt less comfortable, right? And again, not looking for anything particularly good or particularly bad, just noticing your own experience. And then, yeah, I was going to say, if folks want to share anything in the chat, I'm also looking at my own timing. Yeah, we've got time. If anybody wants to share any of your responses to those debrief questions in the chat, welcome to do so. And if you don't want to share it with everyone, you can share it with just me, right? Direct message me in the Zoom chat and I can read it out loud. Or you can just hold your reflections for yourself if that's the better match for the group. It was kind of unnerving to be listened to in that way. Yes, very vulnerable and a little bit uncomfortable. Thank you so much for that. And it makes me think that if you're going to bring this to supervision, there's almost like a volume level that you're setting this on, right? Because if you are working with someone and it's a shift in that relationship channel, the other person's going to notice, right? So you might try this out in like small doses first to see how it does or doesn't impact the relationship. I know, right? That impulse that we have, which makes so much sense, which is to have a reflective moment back to make that connection. Absolutely. And you're not going to take that away. That would be a little artificial, right? In supervision conversations. But you're noticing for yourself where you might do that and how much you enter into the relationship channel on purpose so that you're modulating. There's a self-regulation piece. As someone who doesn't share that much, when the other person didn't jump in, you shared more, right? So like I am an introvert with high affect. That means my sharing can stay really superficial, particularly when I'm trying to gauge the other person. But if the other person gives me the space, it settles my nervous system down and I share very differently. Now, part of that's my own responsibility to modulate, but I notice the difference too. Off screen, it's fine. Yeah, that's great. So there's no verbal feedback, right? And nothing, and made it feel weirder to be listened to. Yeah, what great noticing. That's such a beautiful noticing about what happens when you're paying attention to all the different communication channels and how they impact this thing that we do with other humans. Beautiful awareness. Almost relaxing, right? Because you're not doing that, listening to reply, which we're so trained to do as attorneys and advocates, right? And when time feels precious, like a scarce resource. Thank you all for those beautiful reflections. And there's some others in the chat to sort of to look through together. Yeah, not moving your head is artificial, right? Of course, you're like, I will not move, and trying not to be robotic about it at the same time. It's just an exercise. It's almost like we're going to one side of a continuum. So then you can intentionally find your way back, right? Beautiful. Thank you all. Okay, so we're going to move now to, this Zoom environment where we're suddenly present to each other when we don't expect it. You're like, oh, hi, here's my real life. Here I am. Yeah, thank you for naming that. And certainly you can design with the other person how you want to do this, right? Like, or the other two people, how that works. Okay, so next set of skills. Here we go. We did that. Okay, coaching questions. And this may feel even more awkward for folks in the group who have been trained as lawyers, or that might just be my experience. Okay, so if listening is the foundational skill and all you add is curious listening, that's a great takeaway. This coaching questions, or that sometimes they're called powerful questions in the coaching, profession. It's something that you layer on top of the listening so that this is where you start to speak, actually. And they're very specific in their design. So they're open-ended, right? There are no, unlike lawyers where we're often asking to close in on particular facts, particularly like things like cross-examination, right? These are big, open-ended, very broad questions. They are super short. They are no more than 7 words. And that is done as you're learning this to make sure that you are staying out of the relationship channel, because the more words you're saying, the more you're putting yourself in the relationship channel. If you're limited to 7 words, you're backing out of the relationship channel. And they most often start with what, right? That is, if you're starting a question with what, that's likely a coaching question. They're framed in that mindset of curiosity, right? That competency of curiosity. You're trying to ask questions where only the other person could possibly know the answer, right? So this is not a question where you have come up with an answer in advance and you're trying to match up whether the other person can get there. And no, I said that, right? No secret answers already in mind. It's not a gotcha moment, because the other person will know that, right? We're good at figuring out when someone is setting us up and there's a test involved. So this means no leading questions, right? You're not trying to get someone to a specific answer or content or way of thinking. These are not closed questions, meaning yes, no, or factual clarification questions. And these are not why questions. Because research shows that when someone's asked a why question, particularly, why did you do that? It actually, the amygdala, which is the sort of one aspect of the amygdala, is it serves as a kind of smoke detector in the brain for risk. Why questions, we're very sophisticated in understanding other people. We know that usually there's a judgment involved, and we know it as we hear the question. So why did you do that? is already going to put someone in a little bit of a fight flight response. So none of these kinds of questions. Here are some examples of coaching questions. And the other handout that Jorge has posted, there's even a longer list of sort of sample coaching questions. But you can see, I'll start with what. All of them are something that are broad and open, and only the other person could know the answer. And they're all super short, right? Like, what's important to you about that? What have you tried in the past? What information do you need? What do you already know about the situation? What do you not know yet about the situation? All of those are coaching questions. So now we're going to practice these. And you're going to go back in to the breakout, same breakouts. And so for folks who are working in pairs, oh, let me see, there's a question. Right. Nope. Great. Okay. Here are the instructions so that you have them with you as you go into the chat. Again, shortest to longest hair. The first person, shortest hair person, is going to continue to share about whatever the thing they were already sharing about. And this time for 2 minutes total, but there's going to be more of a conversation because the other person or other two people are now tasked with asking 1 to 2 coaching questions during that 2-minute period, right? And the goal of those questions is to increase the person who's sharing their understanding of this thing that they like, their awareness about it, maybe to see a new facet of it or to understand something more about it more deeply. Just all you're trying to do is support them in talking out loud. And remember, the act of talking out loud in this way is what puts the brain in that positive emotion attractor state, which down regulates the nervous system and lets the person think more expansively. So that's all you're doing with these questions, is you're just kind of like, hey, what's your experience of this? What's important to you about this thing? What do you like most about it? What do you do to get more of this experience? What other places in your life do you also get this kind of experience, right? Like anything that broadens their thinking. And if they have to pause before they answer you, then you've hit the bullseye. Because what that means is their brain is going, oh, that's an unexpected question. I have to think about that for a moment, and I don't know my own answer right off the bat. Okay, so for the person who is sharing, please be coachable, meaning if you talk solid for the 2 minutes, then the other people have to interrupt you. And we have all these social and cultural things around interruption. So if you can just talk in a chunk and then pause and let the other person or the other 2 people in your group ask their coaching question. And just, you're like experimenting here. It's going to be weird. It's going to be awkward. There's going to be some discomfort. You're going to be totally fine. You're in it together. You're all supporting each other. So if there's some humor or giggles or awkward pauses or silence, yes, you are doing the thing. That's great if any of that happens. And if you get stuck, if you land in your group and you're like, I have to ask a question and my mind is frozen because you're in like stress response, just bring some curiosity, and then you can just ask any of these sample questions, right? Which I will put in the chat right now. And it does not matter if the question that you ask is one of these. That's great because you're trying it on. Okay, what questions might there be? Raise hands or in the chat as I recreate these rooms. All rooms. Yes, my fingers crossed is that you will be put back in the same rooms if I have understood the Zoom process correctly. And you're going to go in for 8 minutes this time for time to settle, and then each person share for 2, self-time, same thing. I'm not seeing any questions. All right, here you go, and thank you in advance for your practice. Welcome back as folks are coming back. Welcome back to the big Zoom space. Thank you all. So the Zoom magic did not hold. We think because some folks had dropped off and some new folks had joined. So it may be possible that you were or with not with a brand new group of people. And so hopefully that still worked. And then again, just to pause here for a couple debrief questions for yourself and then sharing in the chat. Like, what was it like to ask open-ended questions where you didn't know the answer with that competency of curiosity? And then the flip side, right? What was it like to be asked those kinds of questions? And again, not looking for anything to have felt good or not good, or felt right or not right, or been useful or not useful. Like, the point here, because now you know these are coaching questions, right? I don't know your answer to these questions. They start with what? I'm inviting your self-reflection for learning, right? And awareness. And so invitation to share in the chat, anybody who wants to. What was your experience like as you were trying out that skill? Let's just see if anyone is willing to share. So a reflection to me that sharing with strangers is different, especially as a private person. But the nosy part of me loves prying into other people's stories. That is such beautiful self-awareness, right? You're like, I'm a private person, so sharing with folks I don't know is less comfortable. And there is a part of me that kind of delights in hearing other people's stories. It's so great. Felt less uncomfortable for me, especially going in expecting a hot bench. Oh, right, expecting to know that you were going to be asked questions. You're like, okay, I know what's happening here. So there was some part of you that with that certainty about what the format was, felt a little more relaxed. Beautiful. Such good self-observation. Anything else coming in from folks about what did or did not work? No, if anything else comes in, we'll see it or I'll read it. Okay, did that. Okay, quick last skill, right? So now you're listening at level 2, curious attention directed on the other person, listening to understand them, not to reply. When you speak, you're loading in coaching questions. And I'll talk in a minute about how you do that in supervision. Like, how do you bring this to supervision where you do have an agenda, right? You are not agenda-less, right? Like, there are organizational and programmatic and team and interpersonal expectations at play in the supervision relationship channel. But you've listened with curiosity. You're loading in a coaching question. What's one more thing that you're doing? You are observing and mirroring. Because what you're doing is if you think about yourself as kind of a receptacle of what the other person is saying, and then you're feeding some part of it back to them so they see it, right? Because it's not with your agenda yet. It's to help them understand their own thinking. So first you're observing, right? You're paying attention. The second is mirroring and reflecting. And this is where that lack of attachment comes in, without judgment. You are trying to not mirror it back to them with a perspective or a judgment or a leading quality to it. And then you follow it by a coaching question. So let's say I'm supervising someone who's trying to like work out a thorny problem that they've encountered in whatever their work is. And I'm listening to them. And I'm saying, well, what do you know about this? What do you not know about this? What are you observing as you think about it? If we slow things down, where are things clear and where are they not clear? And then they keep saying someone else's name. I might pause here and say, I want to observe for you. You've talked 5 times about this other person. That's my observation. Neutral. I don't know why it's coming up, but I'm noticing it. I don't have any agenda. And I say, what role might they be playing in this? Or, you've said the word complicated a bunch of times in here, and I'm curious what that means to you. Observing with neutrality, coaching question coupled with it. So we're not going to take time to practice this one because we don't have time, but that's the third skill: listening, coaching question, and then this observing, mirroring, fact, statement, observation coupled with a coaching question. And this last one is where in supervision, it becomes this dance, almost like, the game of tennis, where They lob a ball your way, you notice something about the ball and you send it back over the net to them because they're the ones doing the work. You're just supporting their thinking and problem solving. Okay, so in a bit of time, I'm going to give 3 examples in supervision. Like, I'm going to narrate hypothetical scenarios for you. This is new for me because usually when I do this training in person, we then do like a coaching demo, but we can't really do that in Zoom. And I wouldn't want to call someone into a place where they didn't feel comfortable. So I'm going to like narrate 3 different kinds of supervision scenarios for you. And you can tell me whether you think this works in the evaluation at the end. I welcome your questions, right, around these 3 scenarios. And so I thought of like, what are some common supervision conversations that need to take place? One is when the supervisee, the direct report, is trying to solve some kind of problem, right? In a kind of check-in meeting where they're like, I'm running into some obstacles here, and you want to support them in problem solving rather than being the person in the relationship who has to do the problem solving. The second is when something has gone wrong. Like there's been an incident in their work where there were some mistakes, errors, something didn't happen the way you and they would have wanted, and you want them to debrief it on their own and learn from it and set some, out of that debrief and learning, and set some intentions for what they'll do next time. And the last is the really thorny one around constructive feedback and how can coaching play a role in that, which is probably the place where you as a supervisor do have the most agenda, right? You are holding organizational and programmatic expectations in your role. So 3 examples in each of those areas. And I'm going to give you like a little narration, and I'm also going to give you some of the coaching questions that I might ask in one of those scenarios. And I will just acknowledge upfront that I have all the control here because like it's an imaginary conversation. And then in real life, it's much more complicated because here I've scripted what the person might say next. And in a real supervision conversation, you don't know what the person's going to say next, which is part of that sort of like, you have to have a kind of like soft knees, just like in tennis. If you lock your knees up, you can't move to where the ball actually comes across the net. Coaching conversations and supervision is the same thing. You want soft knees because you kind of have to go to where the conversation is going. Okay, so I want you to imagine a situation where there's a person who is a pro bono outreach coordinator named Eden, and they have the task, they're held responsible for recruiting enough pro bono volunteers for some upcoming legal clinics, right? Like that's their job, and this is one of the key areas of responsibility in their job. And they're coming to a check-in conversation with a supervisor because they've tried a bunch of outreach strategies and they really just are not bringing in the number of volunteers that are needed for the schedule of clients. This is a forward-looking, problem-solving conversation. So here are some of the coaching questions and then my imaginary response that Eden might give. So the supervisor might start by saying, Eden and the supervisor are talking, and they're talking about the fact that the numbers are not where they need to be. And Eden is saying, yeah, I'm really struggling with this. And the supervisor can say, listen, let's talk about how we can do some problem solving around this together. So you're signaling that it's a joint problem solving. It's not as directive. There's a problem solving approach. You might visualize it as the supervisor and Eden are sitting side by side, like shoulder to shoulder, looking at this problem rather than across the table from each other with supervision hierarchy. And just how are you feeling about the outreach efforts so far, right? Like what's your experience so far? Open-ended, curious question, can't know the answer, trying to draw out Eden's thinking. And then Eden might say something like, I'm feeling really frustrated. This is where it's easier because I'm scripting it, right? I've sent emails, I've done social media, I've really been like trying to reach volunteers, but they're just not responding. And I know we're not hitting the numbers that we need for these clinics. I'm starting to feel really anxious. And then the supervisor, using some coaching questions, could say things like, oh, wow, I hear you. And I hear that you're frustrated and that you've been trying some things, a little bit of observation, neutrality. What do you think has worked well in the past when you've had success in the past? And you might, explore some of that with Eden. And then like, what's different this time? Again, you might know what's been successful in the past, but it has more empowerment if it comes from Eden. And what's different this time is trying to help them scope the landscape. Like what's going on? What are the factors at play? All of which are also coaching questions. And then Eden might do some brainstorming around that, like what's worked in the past, you start to spot some factors about what's different this time, right? Maybe in the past they did direct phone calls or targeted specific volunteers or enlisted other team members to help recruit volunteers from their networks. And then so the supervisor in this observe plus question might say, hey, it sounds like these kinds of personal connections in the past led to success, that they made a difference. So knowing that now that we've identified that together, how might you, which is another way of saying what would it be like to use a personal connective touch now to get these numbers bumped up in this moment, right? Because what you're doing is you're asking Eden to look back at their own success and translate that into things that they will do, action items now. And then hopefully Eden does some brainstorming around that, like where could they start? What would the plan be? You can keep asking some coaching questions to be like, well, when do you need to do that by? And what would that look like? And what supports do you need? What resources might there need to be provided to you? And so you're supporting Eden from moving from the reflection part to developing their own plan. And then, of course, because you're a supervisor, you might end with some accountability, right? Like, okay, so you've got a plan. Here's how I'd like to see it next. And you could either say, I'd like updates from you, or you could say, how can you provide me? Or what kinds of updates can you provide me and when? So that I know you're moving forward with the plan and I know whether the numbers are going up or not. Now, that kind of problem solving is probably the easiest place to bring in a coaching conversation, particularly if you're working with an employee who is really a great match for the responsibilities of the job. They're flourishing in the role. They're able to do this kind of self-reflection, right? That's probably the ideal scenario. Like you're using coaching to start empower and build in the growth of an employee who's got the role down and has experienced one, scratchy problem in the role. I'm checking time. I think I have time to do these next two. I'll see if there's any questions. No, but I want to make sure I address the constructive feedback one, because that's the one where I get questions all the time when I do this training. In a debrief and learning situation, this is when something has gone wrong. It's not a forward-looking conversation. You are inviting an employee to look back at something that did not go well, but you want them to own the accountability and the reflection on it, rather than you telling them this did not work and here's why I think it didn't work. You're saying to them, factual observation, here's the places where this was not what we expected, not what was needed, did not meet the expectations for the role. How do you make sense of that? And how do you learn from that sense making so that it does not happen again, or that you shift things, or you address things, or that things happen differently next time? So imagine there's a staff attorney named Carmen. She scheduled a legal clinic at the wrong time, sent out wrong information, bad results for clients and the organization and relationships. And you're the supervisor sitting down with her, right? So you might start with factual observation, as neutral as possible. Here's what happened. Here's was the impact on clients, the organization, and these relationships, right? So you're setting the stage as a supervisor. And then rather than you moving the conversation forward, you then back out of the relationship channel a little bit and you say, can you just walk me through your understanding of what happened? Like, I really am curious about as you look back, how can you make sense of where we ended up with these mistakes, right? You're putting the responsibility on the other person to do the thinking. And hopefully Carmen would be able to look backwards and say, okay, I was feeling overwhelmed. Maybe there's time pressures. I didn't do these things with the team, or I didn't have someone help me look at the materials, like whatever their reflections are. And you might spend some time as neutrally as possible, like not in a shame and blame place, but like really helping the person see like what happened. Like, can you help me understand? Can you help yourself understand? What were the factors at play here that led to this situation with these outcomes that neither of us would have wanted? And then you say, okay, so now that you're looking backwards, if you could have a redo, if you could rewind and start over, what might you do differently? That's a learning question, right? You're exploring the learning prompt. And then hopefully that person's capable of doing that. And then from that learning that's developed, like what could you have done differently? Then you take all of that and say, okay, so now you've got a bunch of ideas about what you would have done differently this time. What are the things from that you now apply moving forward? And now you're in problem solving mode, right? You've done the debrief and learning that's a retrospective. You use the learning that has developed and you say to the person, tell me how you move forward with this, because this can't happen again, right? That's the supervision piece. This can't happen again. That's an expectation. But then you ask a coaching question and say, tell me what you're going to do differently. Like, create the plan. Like, what's this going to look like moving forward? And if the person's capable, then you ask again at the end of like you did with Eden, at the end of a problem solving question, great, what supports do you need? What resources do you need? And then if you want to hold an accountability question, say, okay, how am I going to know as the supervisor that this is working? What kind of information can you share with me? By when do you want to do these things? Like, there's an accountability part that comes at the end of the conversation. Okay. Last one, and the one that no one thinks will ever work, constructive feedback. So let me say that in constructive feedback, particularly if there is an existing tone in the relationship channel where there's some loss of trust, which can happen when employees are not meeting the expectations of their role, there can be loss of trust on both sides. There can be a little bit more tension in the relationship. This is a harder place to do coaching, right? Because you as the supervisor might understandably be feeling some resistance, and the other person is probably more activated in their nervous system and more on the stress response side of things. Feedback of all kinds is activating to the nervous system of both the person giving the feedback and the person receiving the feedback. So we're already operating at a little bit of a biological disadvantage in these conversations. Here's how you might try it out. Which is that you're holding expectations and you're still curious about the other person's experience. So you're trying to do both of those things at the same time. So let's just say that there's Mark, right? His caseload is kind of a mess. He's missing ticklers. He's missed some filing deadlines. You've had conversations with him in the past. Problems are still continuing. There's some caseload management thing going on that you can't quite understand and that he is having trouble seeing clearly. And so again, you can start by the factual observation, right? I want to talk with you about this caseload management situation. We've talked about it in the past. I think you know that it's not working. There's clear indications like you've missed this deadline, you misfiled on this deadline, it's had this impact on this case. This is a serious situation and we need to understand what's happening because this cannot continue, right? That's the kind of like supervisory, as neutrally as possible based on factual observations and the impact on the work that you lay out there in the relationship channel. And then you ask a coaching question. What is your current experience in all of this about your workload, about this caseload? And then hopefully Mark is able to, if there's enough in the relationship channel, to actually start to do some self-reflection or at least share something. I'm overwhelmed. Here's where I'm having trouble. I'm confused about these pieces, like, right? Something's clearly going on Mark's side, and you're trying to understand with that curiosity more about the context. And then you can do that observe, reflect, which is like, okay, I hear that the deadlines are really a pain point for you. And so what have you tried so far to manage the deadlines and what's working and what's not? Like sometimes helping people make those two columns, like here's where things are really going well, and here's where I'm struggling. That already starts to help them parse out their thinking, which otherwise can just be this experiential swirl, and you'll pick up on information as the supervisor, as opposed to you trying to figure out all on your side what's going on. And then as they're trying to, as Mark is trying to figure out, like, here are the places where I'm struggling, you hone in on them. Like, okay, you say that this is a struggle. What might you do around that? And you try to hone in on each of the areas where they've self-identified that they're having trouble, right? And then you do start to do the retrospective. What's worked for you in the past? Are there other places in your life where you manage deadlines? Are there other things that you can draw on? Do you see other models in the team that you think might work for you, right? So like trying to build their own awareness to solve this problem around their own performance. And then if you're trying to get information, then you really hone in, okay, like here are some things that you're going to try with the expectation that you now try them because this your performance needs to meet a baseline expectation in this area. What will you do? By when will you do it? How will I know that you've done it? Those are still coaching questions, but you're really aiming the coaching questions at them understanding that they have to design an accountability system for themselves, where you are there in the supervisory role as an accountability partner. Yeah. Okay. So let me just make sure I've hit everything on there. Yes. Yep. And that you might summarize the accountability plan in writing, verbally. That might be what goes into their performance, their employee file, right? And I'm not talking about a performance improvement plan in a formal sense, but I'm talking about a self-generated where the employee has said, here are the things that I'm going to do to work on this. And that gets confirmed back to them verbally and or in writing. Okay, some great questions. How can you set up the conversation like a disclaimer? So the supervisor says you can see the coaching intentions versus these performance conversations that we have, right? So it's more organic and takes the pressure off. Here's what I tend to do. When I supervise folks, I talk about the moments where we're sitting across the table having a supervision conversation, because people know what that feels like, right? We're across the table from each other. There's a little bit more like we're in our roles, trying to work skillfully with the positional authority that's there, and any equity issues arise, because they always do. And acknowledging that that's the kind of conversation that you have, versus a conversation where you say, listen, there's a gap between the expectations and your performance right now. I want to press pause on all the other things we're talking about, and I want to slow down, and I want to have a problem solving conversation with you so that both you and I understand more about what's happening in this gap. What are the factors? What's your experience? And that we come up together with a plan that comes from you and your thinking, so that you can take the steps you need to start to bring your performance in alignment with the expectations. Like, that's a middle road. And even further one along the continuum is like, hey, listen, let's just try and take off the hats that we wear in these roles for a moment. And let's just sit down together and have a conversation where we talk this out, and like where we map the landscape of this situation together. I use that language a lot. Like, let's map the landscape together of what's going on, so that we can see where things are working and where the challenges are, so that then you and I can both focus some time and energy around addressing where there's challenges. So that might be how I would think about them along a continuum. You can tell me, please, in the chat or raising hand whether you think that works. To build off Martha's question, hybrid supervising environment. Thank you for that. And you're right, that could be a whole training unto itself. This hybrid world, well, first of all, it's very hard to build trust in a hybrid environment. And, I think people have this theory that folks feel more psychologically safe in the space where they spend their lives. But the reality is that we're kind of struggling to do this. Like, what's the emotional tone? It's almost like, it's closer to written communication sometimes, even though you can see and talk to each other. If cameras are off, then all you have is this auditory stuff. And our brains are really working hard to assess all of the levels of those channels: verbiage, language, content. What's the emotional tone underneath? Was that a jab? Was that serious? Was that kind? Right? Like, we're working so hard to understand the other person's emotional tone. And then our nervous systems really have to be intentional about co-regulating over in an online environment. And so what I would say is, sometimes slowing down the pace can help everyone do that better. And the more present the supervisor is, right? The more you are trying to set aside the distractions and be really in the present moment to the conversation, and really looking at and trying to connect with the other person, because you hold positional authority when you are supervising, it is easier for you as the supervisor to set the emotional tone of a meeting, even online. So there is some self-management that can be a resource to you and the other person, which takes some emotional intelligence and stuff that's, also a learned skill. Any other questions coming in? I know we're just coming up on time. If you've got questions that are floating around your brain, please feel free to put them in the chat. Okay, some bottom line takeaways in our last 5 minutes. That was a lot of stuff. If you take away just a couple of things: curiosity, like if that's the only thing that you take away, that's awesome, because that's the root at all of this, being curious about the other person, and also curious about your own experience in the relationship, because these relationship channels are not easy. If you've got the curiosity down, you might try layering in some of that level 2 listening. If that feels comfortable for you, you might try lobbing a couple coaching questions. Or you might just pick one person in your life, which might include like a friend or a partner or kids or a family member, where it's already a little more, safe to try these things out, and just try out that coaching mindset. Like, try some of these things out. My favorite thing in the world, I have 2 adult kids. I mean, I have children who are now adults themselves, is that when I can remember to just look at their faces. And like, sometimes I'm like, oh, I'm going to look at their eyeballs. I'm just going to look at their eyeballs. And that reminds me to be present and not thinking about my to-do list or the email that just came in or the shopping list or that I have to do something else in 5 minutes. I'm just going to use looking at their eyeballs as an anchor for me. And I'm going to listen to them. I'm just going to listen to them because time is so short. These relationships we have are so precious. Just one moment of a coaching mindset with them. So you might just try that out if that feels useful. So in my role as sort of coach today for you all, here's a moment to just think about some action item and accountability, 2 coaching questions for you. What's one minimum viable, right? Like an actual doable action item that you'll take from today. One thing that you're committing to yourself that you'll do or think about more or try out, whatever the action item is that makes sense for you. And then the follow-up coaching question is always, by when will you do it? Like, what accountability are you setting into place now for yourself? So with that forward vision, positive emotional tractor state, trying to engage that part of the brain, what's one thing you'll do? And by when will you do it? And then I believe Jorge has put the link, or will put the link. There it is. Beautiful. What a nice partnership. Thank you. Evaluation survey. Just a reminder, these were the learning goals. I would really ask you all to do the evaluation survey. I'm trying to figure out how to bring some of this content to the legal services world. Your frank point of view on what worked and even more so what didn't will be so useful to me. I will be so grateful. So your very honest feedback, and I share it all back with the Florida Legal Services Training Initiative and with Jorge, so they can also see, how did this land? What worked, what didn't? And I think that is, yes, just a reminder for me to say thank you to all of you for letting me in for 90 minutes of your work lives. I just appreciate being able to be any part of the Florida Legal Services system. So very grateful to all of you for that. I think I'll stop sharing in case that's useful. And let me just scan and see if any other questions came in. No, just thanks. Oh, that's so lovely of all of you. Thank you. Any questions in the last 30 seconds?
I have to echo what all the attendees are saying in the chat. Thank you, Julia. This was an amazing presentation. And thank you all for attending today and participating. I was low-key jealous about not being able to jump into those breakout rooms, but I'll see if I can figure out a way to do it in the future. We hope you found this session valuable and that it provided useful takeaways for your work. As a reminder, October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and towards the end, we have Pro Bono Week. So hopefully you can put some of these skills to practice as well. So we'd love to hear your feedback. As Julia said, I dropped that link in the chat as well. All of this, the recording, the materials that Julia shared, the link to the survey, all of this is going to go out on an email as well. If for whatever reason you have any colleagues that would be interested in watching this, we will be posting it on YouTube as well, in case they didn't have a chance to register. So thank you again, Julia, for sharing your expertise with us, and all of you for participating. So we look forward to seeing you in future events, Julia. So have a great afternoon, everybody, and thanks for joining us today.